Today, you'll discover the story of Samuel Hawkins, a gold prospector whose act of compassion during a deadly blizzard would challenge an entire town's prejudices and redefine what it means to be family. Get ready for a narrative filled with courage, sacrifice, and unexpected bonds. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The winter of 1882 was the harshest Colorado had seen in decades. Samuel Hawkins pressed his face against the frosted window of his cabin, watching the blizzard rage with unprecedented fury. At 35, he'd spent the last 7 years alone in these mountains, searching for gold that remained as elusive as the family he'd left behind in Missouri. His supplies were running dangerously low, maybe 3 days' worth if he rationed carefully. The storm showed no signs of breaking, and the nearest town of Silver Creek was a day's ride in good weather. In this blizzard, it might as well have been on the moon. Samuel was contemplating whether to risk the journey when something caught his eye. Through the swirling white chaos, he glimpsed movement near the tree line. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the storm, but then he saw it again, a figure stumbling through the snow, clearly in distress. Without thinking, he grabbed his heavy coat and plunged into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and numbing his face instantly. He fought through the drifts, following the dark shape that kept appearing and disappearing in the white void. When he finally reached the figure, his heart nearly stopped. It was a woman, an Apache woman, clutching a bundle to her chest. Her traditional dress was soaked through, ice crystals forming on the intricate beadwork. Her lips were blue, her dark eyes glazed with exhaustion and cold. "Please," she whispered in accented English, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "My baby." That's when Samuel realized the bundle was a child, maybe 2 years old, wrapped in a blanket that was far too thin for this weather. Without hesitation, he scooped both mother and child into his arms. The woman weighed almost nothing, her body trembling violently from the cold. The journey back to his cabin felt endless. The woman tried to walk, but her legs kept buckling. Samuel half-carried, half-dragged her through the snow, his own strength waning with each step. The child hadn't made a sound, which terrified him more than the storm. Finally, they burst through his cabin door. Samuel kicked it shut and immediately moved them to the fireplace. His hands shook as he added more wood, building the fire higher. The woman collapsed on the floor, still clutching her child. "Let me help," Samuel said gently, reaching for the child. The woman's arms tightened protectively, but when she looked into his eyes and saw only concern, she slowly released her grip. The child, a boy, was unconscious but breathing. Samuel wrapped him in his warmest blankets and placed him near the fire. Then he turned his attention to the mother. Her name, she managed to tell him between chattering teeth, was Maria. "Growfeather, my husband," she whispered. "Dead. 3 days. Soldiers. They said we must leave. I tried to reach town." Samuel's jaw clenched. He'd heard about the forced relocations, the army moving Apache families to reservations far from their ancestral lands. He'd seen the long lines of people trudging through the snow, but it had seemed distant from his isolated existence. Now it was in his cabin, dying by his fire. He worked through the night, warming blankets, making hot broth from his meager supplies, checking on both mother and child constantly. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in Apache, sometimes in broken English, telling fragments of her story. Her husband, Joseph Crow Feather, had been a scout for the army, believing cooperation would protect his family. When he died of pneumonia, that protection vanished. The soldiers gave her 3 days to pack and join the relocation. She'd tried, but the storm had caught her on the mountain pass. They said, "Reservation, better life," she laughed, bitterly, then coughed. Better to die free, in storm, than live caged. By morning, the child, whose name was Thomas, had recovered enough to cry, which Samuel took as a good sign. Maria, however, was burning with fever. Samuel knew he needed medicine, supplies, help, but the storm still raged, and even if it cleared, going to Silver Creek meant revealing he was harboring an Apache woman and child. In the current climate, that could be dangerous for all of them. For 3 days, Samuel nursed Maria through her fever. He used every remedy he knew, willow bark tea, cold compresses, keeping her warm but not too hot. Thomas, resilient as only children can be, recovered quickly and began exploring the cabin with curious eyes. The boy was fascinated by everything: Samuel's mining tools, his few books, the crackling fire. When Samuel held out a piece of dried apple, Thomas took it solemnly, then smiled for the first time. That smile hit Samuel like a pickaxe to the chest. He'd had a son once, back in Missouri. Cholera had taken him and Samuel's wife within days of each other. He'd come west to escape those memories, but here they were, reflected in the Apache child's dark eyes. On the 4th day, Maria's fever broke. She woke clear-eyed but weak, immediately reaching for Thomas. Samuel brought the boy to her. Then she held him like he might disappear. "You saved us," she said simply. "Anyone would have," Samuel began, but she cut him off with a look. "No, not anyone. Not for Apache." She was right, and they both knew it. The territory was rife with hatred, fear, and violence. The Apache wars had left scars on both sides, wounds that wouldn't heal for generations. Yet here they were, sharing his cabin, sharing his food, sharing humanity. As Maria recovered, she insisted on helping around the cabin. She mended his clothes with skill he'd never possessed, prepared meals that made his simple supplies taste like feasts, and kept the cabin cleaner than it had been in years. Thomas followed Samuel everywhere, learning English with the speed that only young children possess. "Pick," Thomas would say, holding up Samuel's mining pick. "That's right, partner. Pick," Samuel would reply, and Thomas would beam. The 2 weeks passed in this strange domestic peace. The storm had long since passed, but Samuel found excuses not to go to town. He told himself the trails were still too dangerous, that he needed to be sure Maria was fully recovered. The truth was simpler and more complex. He didn't want this to end. One evening, as Thomas played with some carved wooden animals Samuel had made, Maria spoke quietly. "You had family." It wasn't a question. Samuel nodded, staring into the fire. "Wife, son, they died. How long?" 8 years. Maria was quiet for a moment. "My husband, he believed in peace. He said Apache and white man must learn to live together. I told him he was fool." She paused. Maybe he was right. Samuel looked at her. In the firelight, her face was both young and ancient, marked by loss but not broken by it. "Maybe we're all fools," he said. "Better to be fool with hope than wise with hate," Maria replied. The next morning, Samuel woke to find Maria packing their few belongings. His heart sank. "You're leaving." "We cannot stay forever. You have been kind, but—" "But nothing," Samuel interrupted. "Where will you go?" "The reservation." Maria's face hardened. "Never." "Then stay, at least until spring. The passes are still dangerous, and Thomas likes you," Maria said softly. "He calls you Sam Papa when you don't hear." Samuel's throat tightened. "I hear." They looked at each other across the small cabin. Two people who had lost everything, who belonged to worlds that were supposed to be enemies, who had found something unexpected in each other. "If we stay," Maria said carefully, "people will talk. Let them talk. They will do more than talk." Samuel knew she was right. Silver Creek wasn't known for its tolerance, but the thought of this cabin returning to its former emptiness and of losing the sound of Thomas's laughter, of losing Maria's quiet strength. It was unbearable. "I need to go to town," he said finally, "for supplies, medicine, food. Will you be here when I get back?" Maria studied his face for a long moment. "Yes." Samuel prepared for the journey with mixed feelings. He needed supplies desperately, but he dreaded the questions, the looks, the judgment he knew would come if anyone discovered his guests. He decided to be careful, buy only what was necessary, and return as quickly as possible. The morning he left, Thomas clung to his leg. "Sam, Papa, go." "I'll be back, partner. You take care of your mama, okay?" Thomas nodded solemnly. Maria stood in the doorway, worry etched on her face. "Be careful," she said. "Always am," Samuel replied, though they both knew careful was relative in a world where kindness to the wrong people could get you killed. The ride to Silver Creek took most of the day. The town looked the same as always, muddy streets. Just false-fronted buildings, men seeking fortune and women seeking stability. Samuel hitched his horse outside Morrison's general store and steeled himself for what was to come. Morrison's general store smelled of tobacco, leather, and pickled vegetables. Jake Morrison, the proprietor, looked up from his ledger as Samuel entered. "Hawkins, thought you might have frozen to death up there. Hell of a storm." "Nearly did," Samuel said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Need supplies, running low on everything." He began gathering items: flour, salt, coffee, dried beans. Then, trying to seem nonchalant, he added some items that raised Jake's eyebrows: children's shoes, a small coat, fabric that was clearly for a woman's dress. "Planning on starting a family up there, Sam?" Jake asked with a knowing grin. Samuel forced a laugh. "Found some things in an abandoned wagon. Figured I could trade them next time I'm through." It was a weak lie, and Jake's expression showed he didn't quite buy it, but before he could probe further, the door burst open. Sheriff William Tate entered, followed by 2 soldiers from Fort Defiance. "Morrison, we're looking for Apache stragglers," the sheriff announced. "Woman and a child, didn't make it to the reservation transport, probably dead in the storm. But the army wants confirmation." Samuel's blood ran cold, but he kept examining a sack of coffee beans. "Haven't seen any Apache around here," Jake said. "That storm would have killed anyone caught in it." "That's what I figure," Sheriff Tate agreed. "But the captain's got a bee in his bonnet about it. Says the woman's husband was a scout. Might have taught her some survival tricks." One of the soldiers, a young lieutenant with ambitious eyes, spoke up. "There's a reward, $50 for information leading to their capture." "Capture?" Samuel couldn't help himself. "I thought the relocations were voluntary." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Nothing voluntary about it, Hawkins. Government orders. These Apache need to be on reservations for their own good, and ours. Besides," the lieutenant added, "any white man harboring Apache fugitives would be guilty of treason." "Good hang for it." The store fell silent. Samuel felt every eye on him. He carefully set down the coffee beans and met the sheriff's gaze. "Well, if I see any Apache, I'll be sure to let you know," he said evenly. "You do that, Sheriff," Tate replied. "How's the prospecting going?" "Same as always. Lots of rock, not much gold." "Maybe you should give it up," the sheriff suggested. "Town could use a man with your skills. Plenty of work for someone who knows mining." "I'll think about it," Samuel said, though they both knew he wouldn't. He paid for his supplies, aware of Jake's curious glances at the children's items. As he loaded his horse, he heard voices from the saloon across the street. A group of men were discussing the Apache problem, in terms that made Samuel's stomach turn. "Only good Apache is a dead Apache," one man declared to murmurs of agreement. "Heard they found a whole family frozen up near Marble Peak." Another added, "Serves them right for resisting." Samuel mounted his horse and rode out of town, fighting the urge to gallop. He had to appear unhurried, unconcerned, but his mind raced. The army was actively searching. There was a reward. And worst of all, people were watching, suspicious. The ride back seemed endless. As his cabin finally came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, he felt a mixture of relief and dread. They were still there. But for how long could this last? Maria met him at the door, Thomas peeking out from behind her skirts. The worry in her eyes told him she'd been watching the trail all day. "Trouble?" she asked simply. Samuel began unloading the supplies. "Army's looking for you. Sheriff too." "There's a reward." Maria's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "We will leave tonight." "No." The word came out harsher than Samuel intended. "No," he repeated more gently. "Where would you go? It's still winter." "Thomas couldn't survive another journey like that. Better to die trying than bring death to you," Maria said. Samuel stopped unpacking and looked at her, really looked at her. In the weeks she'd been here, she'd gone from a half-dead stranger to what? He couldn't name it, didn't dare name it. But the thought of her leaving felt like contemplating cutting off his own arm. "I've been dead for 8 years, he said quietly. "You and Thomas, you brought me back to life. I won't let them take you. You cannot fight the army." I'm not fighting anyone. I'm just not seeing any Apache around here." He managed a weak smile. "It must have been the storm affecting my eyesight." That night, after Thomas was asleep, Samuel and Maria sat by the fire. The weight of their situation hung between them like a physical presence. "Tell me about your husband," Samuel said suddenly. Maria looked surprised but began to speak. She told him about Joseph Crow Feather, who had learned English from missionaries, who believed education and cooperation were the path forward for his people. She spoke of their courtship, their wedding that blended Apache and Christian traditions, their joy when Thomas was born. "He would have liked you," she said finally. "He believed there were good men among the whites. I did not believe until now." "I'm not a good man," Samuel said. "I'm a coward who ran from his grief, who spent years hiding in these mountains." "A coward would have left us in the storm," Maria countered. "A coward would have collected the reward." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling. Between them, finally Maria spoke again. "What was her name, your wife?" "Elizabeth. We called her Libby, and my boy was James. He was 4 when—" Samuel couldn't finish. Maria reached across the space between them and touched his hand. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him since that night in the storm. Her hand was calloused from work, but gentle. "They live in you still," she said. "I see it when you play with Thomas. Love does not die with death." Samuel turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. They sat like that, holding hands in the firelight, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness of loss. The next morning brought new challenges. Samuel spotted riders in the distance, moving along the ridge. They were too far away to identify, but their presence meant the search was expanding. "Abda, we need a plan," he told Maria. "If they come here, I will hide. There is cave you showed Thomas, where you store tools. We can—" "No," Samuel had been thinking all night. "If they search and find you, we're all dead. We need something better." He paced the cabin, mind racing. Then, suddenly, he stopped. "How do you feel about becoming Mrs. Hawkins?" Maria's eyes widened. "What?" "If we're married, legally married, they can't take you. You'd be my wife, an American citizen. Thomas would be my stepson." "Samuel," Maria's voice was carefully controlled. "You know what you ask, to marry a Apache woman. Your people will never accept." "They're not my people," Samuel said firmly. "You and Thomas are my people now." The challenge was finding someone to perform the marriage. The circuit. Judge wouldn't arrive for months, and no preacher in Silver Creek would marry a white man to an Apache woman. But Samuel remembered something. An old prospector named Elijah Morse, who lived 2 valleys over. Elijah was an ordained minister who'd lost his faith after losing his congregation to smallpox, but he still had the legal authority to perform marriages. "It's a day's ride each way," Samuel explained to Maria. "We'd have to take Thomas. It'd risk being seen, and if this Elijah refuses, then we'll find another way. But I knew him years ago. He's different, lost too much to hate anymore." They set out before dawn, Thomas bundled between them on the horse. The boy thought it was an adventure, chattering excitedly about the trees and mountains. Maria had fashioned a bonnet that helped hide her features, and from a distance they might pass for any family traveling. Elijah's cabin was even more isolated than Samuel's, built into the side of a cliff face. The old man emerged as they approached, squinting in the morning sun. His hair was white as fresh snow, his face carved by years of solitude and sorrow. "Samuel Hawkins," he said, voice rusty from disuse. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet, Elijah. I need your help." Elijah's eyes moved to Maria and Thomas. Understanding dawned on his weathered face. "Come inside," he said simply. Over coffee that tasted like boiled dirt, Samuel explained their situation. Elijah listened without interrupting, his eyes moving between Samuel and Maria. "You know what you're asking?" Elijah said finally. "This marriage, it'll make you outcasts." "We already are," Samuel replied. Elijah turned to Maria. "And you? This is what you want, not just for survival, but truly—" Maria looked at Samuel, then back at Elijah. "My first husband married me for love. I would not dishonor his memory by marrying for less." The simple honesty of her words made Samuel's heart race. He'd proposed this as a legal solution, but hearing Maria speak of love— "Well then," Elijah stood, joints creaking. "Let me find my Bible. Haven't used it in years. But I suppose the words still work." The ceremony was simple, performed, in Elijah's cluttered cabin with Thomas as the only witness. Elijah spoke the traditional words, but added his own. "Marriage is a fortress against the storms of the world," he said. "You two have weathered literal storms to find each other. May this union be your shelter against all the storms to come." When he pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Maria gently. It was their first kiss, tender and full of promise. Thomas clapped his hands, making them both laugh. Elijah produced a marriage certificate, one of the few he had left. "This makes it legal," he said, signing with a flourish. "Just though I suspect legality isn't your only concern, will you keep this quiet?" Samuel asked. "Who would I tell?" Elijah gestured at his empty valley. "Besides, I stopped caring what the world thinks long ago. You folks are welcome. Here any time. Nice to remember what hope looks like." The ride back was different. Maria rode with her arms around Samuel's waist, no longer maintaining the careful distance of propriety. Thomas dozed between them, secure in the circle of their embrace. But their joy was short-lived. As they approached their valley, Samuel, a spotted smoke, too much smoke for just their chimney. His heart sank. "Stay here," he told Maria, but she shook her head. "We face this together now." They rode in to find Sheriff Tate and 3 deputies waiting by their cabin. The sheriff's expression was grim but unsurprised. "Hawkins," he said, "figured we'd find you here. Jake Morrison mentioned your unusual purchases. Then someone saw you riding with companions this morning." Samuel dismounted slowly, helping Maria and Thomas down. He kept his body between them and the lawmen. "Sheriff," he said calmly, "this is my wife, Maria, and our son, Thomas." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Your wife, married this morning, all legal." Samuel produced the certificate. "That makes her an American citizen, doesn't it?" Sheriff Tate examined the document, his face darkening. "Elijah Morse, Should have known that crazy hermit would be involved. He looked up. This might be legal, Hawkins, but it ain't right. You know what she is. I know exactly who she is, Samuel said, emphasizing who over what. She's my wife. One of the deputies, a young man with mean eyes, spat tobacco juice. Apache lover, he muttered. Watch your tongue, Samuel warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. Easy, Sheriff Tate raised a hand. No need for violence. But Hawkins, you've got to understand, this arrangement. It won't be accepted in town. People won't trade with you. You'll be shunned. Then we'll trade elsewhere. And if the Apache raid nearby settlements, people will blame you, say you're harboring hostiles. My wife and son are not hostiles, Samuel said firmly. The sheriff studied them for a long moment. Thomas had pressed himself against Maria's skirts, eyes wide with fear. Maria stood straight, dignity radiating from every line of her body. I can't force you to leave, the sheriff said finally. That paper makes it legal. But Hawkins, you're making a powerful enemy of this town. When trouble comes, and it will come, don't expect help. I haven't expected help from anyone in 8 years, Samuel replied. Don't see why I'd start now. The sheriff mounted his horse. Your funeral, Hawkins. Maybe literally. He touched his hat mockingly toward Maria. Mrs. Hawkins. After they left, the small family stood in the gathering dusk. The confrontation had gone better than Samuel had feared, but worse than he'd hoped. They were safe for now, but the sheriff's warning hung in the air like smoke. You can still annul this, Maria said quietly. Say I forced you, or... Samuel pulled her into his arms, cutting off her words. You're my wife, he said firmly. Thomas is my son. This is our home. Let them come. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a tentative peace. True to the sheriff's warning, no one from Silver Creek would trade with them, but Samuel found other settlements, places where his gold dust was welcome regardless of his family situation. Some people stared, others whispered, but money talked louder than prejudice. Thomas thrived, growing like a weed in the mountain air. He followed Samuel everywhere, learning to pan for gold, identify minerals, and read the weather. In the evenings, Maria taught him Apache traditions, stories, songs, and the names of plants and their uses. The boy grew up straddling two worlds, comfortable in both. The first real test came in late spring. A group of Apache warriors, fleeing from soldiers, took shelter in the valley. Samuel found them near his claim, wounded and exhausted. His first instinct was fear, not of the men themselves, but of what their presence might mean for his family. Maria spoke to them in Apache, her voice calm but firm. After a tense exchange, she turned to Samuel. They are from my mother's clan, she explained. They seek only water and rest. They will move on by nightfall. Samuel looked at the warriors, young men, really, barely older than boys. One had a festering wound on his shoulder. Tell them they can rest in the equipment shed, he said. I'll bring water and food. Maria's eyes shone with gratitude and something deeper, pride in the man she'd married. The warriors left as promised, but not before the wounded one pressed something into Samuel's hand, a small turquoise stone, polished smooth. He says you have the heart of a human being, Maria translated. Not white, not Apache, human. The word of Samuel harboring Apache warriors inevitably reached Silver Creek. This time, it wasn't the sheriff who came, but a mob of angry townspeople. 20 men, armed and drunk on righteous fury, arrived at sunset. Hawkins, their leader, a miner named Carl Brennan, shouted, "Come out and face justice." Samuel emerged, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. Maria started to follow, but he motioned her back. What justice would that be, Brennan? You're harboring hostiles, giving aid to the enemy. I gave water to wounded men, Samuel said calmly. Since when is that a crime? Since those men murdered settlers, another man shouted. Which settlers? When? Or are you just assuming all Apache are murderers? The mob grew restless. Someone threw a rock that shattered the cabin window. Thomas cried out in fear, and the sound seemed to inflame the crowd further. Send out the squaw and the brat, Brennan demanded. We'll take them to the reservation where they belong. Over my dead body, Samuel raised his rifle. That can be arranged, someone shouted. The situation was spiraling toward violence when unexpected help arrived. Elijah Morse rode into the clearing, and with him, surprisingly, was Jake Morrison from the general store. That's enough, Jake said, his voice carrying the authority of a respected businessman. Do all of you stand down. Morrison, what are you doing here? Brennan demanded. Preventing a massacre, Jake replied. You men are about to murder a legal American citizen and her child. How do you think that'll play in the territorial newspapers in Washington? She's Apache, someone protested. Moi, she's also Mrs. Samuel Hawkins, recognized by law, Elijah added. I performed the ceremony myself. Any violence against her is violence against an American citizen. That's not justice, that's lynching. The mob wavered. Jake pressed his advantage. Besides, he said, Sam Hawkins has been nothing but honest in his dealings, pays his debts, keeps his word. Can all of you say the same? It was a masterful stroke. Several men in the crowd owed Jake money, and he knew it. Slowly, the mob's energy dissipated. This isn't over, Hawkins, Brennan warned as they departed. You've chosen your side. Remember that when the Apache wars heat up again. After they left, Samuel turned to Jake and Elijah. Why? He asked simply. Jake shrugged, looking embarrassed. My grandmother was Irish, came over during the famine. People treated her like dirt, said she wasn't really white, wasn't really human. I remember her stories. He looked at the cabin where Maria and Thomas watched from the broken window. Seems to me, hate's hate, no matter how you dress it up. Elijah just smiled. I told you. Nice to remember what hope looks like. But from that day forward, Jake Morrison became their lifeline to civilization. He traded fairly for Samuel's gold, ordered supplies they needed, and quietly discouraged the worst of the town's hostility. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was respect. Summer brought unexpected prosperity. Samuel struck a small, but rich vein of gold, enough to improve their cabin and secure their future. He added rooms, bought cattle, and even ordered books for Thomas's education. Maria flourished in the mountain air, her strength and grace evident in everything she did. She started a garden that combined Apache knowledge with seeds from Tauna, creating a small oasis of green in the harsh landscape. In the evenings, she and Samuel would sit on the porch they'd built, watching Thomas play with the dog they'd acquired, a scraggly mutt that followed the boy everywhere. Do you ever regret it? Maria asked one evening as the sun painted the mountains gold. Choosing us over your people. Samuel took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd managed to buy her. They were never my people, he said. I was just going through the motions, pretending to be alive. You and Thomas, you're my life now. Maria leaned her head against his shoulder. Joseph would be glad, she said softly, to know Thomas has a father who loves him. And Elizabeth would be glad I found love again, Samuel replied. Took me a while to realize that's what this is. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son, for Thomas was their son now in every way that mattered, chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The world beyond their valley might disapprove, might hate, might threaten. But here, in this moment, they had built something precious, a family forged not by blood but by choice, not by tradition but by love. As night fell and they went inside their expanded cabin, Samuel reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A desperate woman and child, stumbling through a blizzard. A lonely man, frozen in his grief. a town full of prejudice and fear. And through it all, the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over hate, compassion over fear, family over division, the gold he'd found would make them comfortable. But the real treasure was this: the laughter of a child who called him Papa, the love of a woman who taught him to live again, and the knowledge that sometimes, in the face of all opposition, two broken people could build something whole. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. But inside the cabin, warmth and light and love created their own small universe, a universe where Apache and white, past and present, loss and hope, could coexist in harmony. It wasn't the life Samuel Hawkins had planned when he fled west. It was infinitely better,